What if the thing that holds us back most isn't a lack of talent or drive, but just a lack of mental space? What if the very act of having too little, not enough money, not enough time, doesn't just make your life harder, but it actually hijacks your brain and makes it harder to think clearly? It's a huge idea, and it changes how we should look at everything. So let's get into it.
So here's what we're going to cover. We'll start with a number that's pretty shocking. Then we'll look at something called the scarcity tunnel and the real science behind it. We'll see how this creates a trap that's hard to escape, and we'll end with a completely new way to think about why people do the things they do.
All right, let's just rip the Band-Aid off. What is the actual measurable cost of financial stress on your brain? Well, researchers figured it out, and honestly, it's pretty mind-blowing.
There it is, a drop of 13 IQ points. Just the act of worrying about a big financial problem puts such a strain on your mind that it's like temporarily losing 13 IQ points. Now, this isn't permanent, thank goodness. Think of it more like a massive tax on your brain's bandwidth, a tax you only have to pay when you're stressed about not having enough. But just how big is that tax?
Think about the last time you pulled an all-nighter. Remember how fuzzy you felt? How you couldn't make a good decision to save your life? Well, the mental burden of poverty is actually worse than that. This isn't about someone being less smart. It's about their intelligence being completely hijacked by their circumstances. That's the reality for someone under intense financial pressure.
So how in the world does this happen? How can a simple lack of resources have such a powerful effect on our brain? The researchers came up with a really great metaphor to explain it. They call it the scarcity tunnel.
First off, we've got to be clear about what scarcity really is. It isn't just about the number in your bank account. It's the feeling of not having enough. And that is a huge distinction. It's a psychological state, a mindset, that can be triggered by a lack of money, sure, but also a lack of time or even friendships. And once that scarcity mindset kicks in, your brain does something very, very specific.
And that's where tunneling comes in. It's basically your brain switching into emergency mode. It forces you to focus laser-like on the immediate threat. Paying that urgent bill, hitting that impossible deadline, while you completely ignore everything else happening around you.
This is a real thing, by the way. Scientists have shown that if you ask someone to focus really hard on something right in front of them, their ability to see things on the edges, their peripheral vision, literally shrinks. Well, scarcity does that to your mind. You're so focused on the rent that's due tomorrow that you just don't notice that weird noise your car is making or remember that important application deadline.
Now here's the tricky part. This tunneling isn't all bad. In the short term, it gives you a focused dividend. I mean, we've all felt it, right? That superhuman productivity you get right before a big deadline, you just block everything out and get it done. But that focus comes with a massive tunneling tax, because by ignoring everything outside that tunnel, we often create even bigger problems for ourselves down the road.
Okay, so the theory is one thing, but this whole idea really clicks when you start thinking about your own life. Because let's be real, every single one of us has felt scarcity at some point. Maybe a tight budget, maybe just cramming for finals. We've all been inside that tunnel.
And I want you to really think about this for a second. Go back to a time when you were really, truly stressed about money. Making rent, a credit card bill, whatever. Did you snap at someone? Did you buy something on impulse just to feel better for a minute? Did you forget something important? That thing you did, it probably wasn't a failure of your character. It was a direct consequence of being in the scarcity tunnel, of your brain's bandwidth being totally eaten up by stress. Okay, so this all feels pretty intuitive, right? But how do we know it's real? Well, the researchers, Sendhil Mullainathan and Elder Shafir, didn't just come up with a cool theory. They ran some really clever experiments to prove it.
Their first big study was so simple, it's brilliant. They just went to a mall in New Jersey. They divided shoppers into two groups based on their income, rich and poor, and asked them to think about a hypothetical car repair. For some, it was a manageable $300 bill. For others, it was a much more stressful $3,000 bill. Right after thinking about it, they were given some unrelated brain teasers and tests. And the results were just, wow. When the repair was cheap, both groups performed about the same. No big deal. But when faced with the hard $3,000 problem, the wealthier group's performance didn't change at all. But for the lower income group, just thinking about that bill made their cognitive performance plummet by that same 13 IQ point equivalent. That's the bandwidth tax, right there in black and white.
So to make sure this wasn't just a one-off thing, they took it to the real world. They did another study, this time with sugarcane farmers in India. And this one was even smarter because they tested the exact same farmers at 2 different times of the year. Once right before the harvest, when they were broke, and again right after the harvest, when they had just been paid.
And wouldn't you know it, the results were just as clear. The very same people performed way better on the cognitive tests after they got paid, when their money worries were gone. The effect was like a gain of 9 IQ points. Nothing about the farmers themselves had changed. Not their education, not their skills. The problem was never the person. It was the situation they were in.
And that leads us to the most brutal part of this whole thing. The scarcity mindset isn't just a temporary problem. It actually creates a vicious cycle, a feedback loop that is incredibly hard to break out of. It's called the scarcity trap.
Let's go back inside that tunnel again. A bill is due right now, and you don't have the cash. Your mind is captured. From inside that tunnel, a payday loan with a crazy high interest rate doesn't just seem like a good idea. It seems like the only idea. It solves the urgent, screaming problem in front of you. You're not thinking about next month's interest payment, you're just trying to survive today. It's only when you're outside the tunnel that you can see it for the trap it really is.
You can see how it works step by step. It starts with one urgent need. That triggers the tunneling, which eats up all your mental energy. That intense focus makes a short-term fix, like borrowing money, seem like the only option. But that fix creates an even bigger problem for the future, which of course leads to even deeper scarcity, and the cycle starts all over again. You're just constantly putting out fires, with no bandwidth left to actually fireproof the house.
So all of this brings us to the most important, the most powerful takeaway from all this research. It basically forces us to completely rethink how we judge the behavior of people who are struggling.
We have this tendency to see things like impulsive spending or forgetting an appointment or just poor planning as character flaws. We call it lazy or irresponsible, but what if it's not? This research says, no, those aren't failures of character. They are the predictable, even logical outcomes of a brain that is being overwhelmed by its environment.
And this quote from one of the lead researchers just hits it home perfectly. If I made you poor tomorrow, you'd probably start behaving in many of the same ways we associate with poor people. It's such a profound shift. It's not about the person, it's about the context they're in. It suggests that any one of us, under the same crushing pressure, would probably act the exact same way. And that leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? If we know that scarcity is a tax on our minds, what do we do about it? How do we design systems, at work, in our schools, in our government programs, even in our own lives, that don't add to the burden? How can we create more slack, more breathing room, to give people their mental bandwidth back so they have the space to actually solve their problems? That's the real challenge this research leaves us with.